everyone, it's Bob Crossan, Senior Managing Editor for Water and Waste Digest. Today I have with me Ben Frech. He is the Governmental Affairs Manager for the National Groundwater Association, and we're going to be talking about groundwater regulations and policy, as well as some funding elements that you should know about concerning groundwater during Groundwater Awareness Week.
How's it going, Bob?
It's going. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time and chatting with us about a lot of things going on right now in the groundwater policy and regulations.
Yeah, it's like every year, we think that next year is going to be a little bit slower. And, this was a crazy year. But then around January 3rd hits, and we're like, oh, wait, no, it's going to be another crazy year.
Yeah, absolutely. We were talking before the call just how dense every week this year has been already. But yeah,
Yeah.
could you give just kind of like a brief overview, talk about some of like the high points of things that are going on right now that you guys are paying attention to, and we'll dive into some of those things a little bit later.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So, this year, and as far as policy and regulations go, there's still going to be some of our priority issues are still going to be alive in Washington, D.C., and that includes PFAS and emerging contaminants. Last year, the EPA put out a PFAS roadmap, essentially where they mapped out future actions for PFAS, including a potential drinking water standard in 2023. And so, besides, keeping a close eye on that and communication with the EPA on that as these policies unfold, we also hear there's going to be some companion legislation, some PFAS legislation coming again in the Senate and the House to kind of work with that roadmap. So, anytime there's any type of PFAS legislation, we are very involved in it. We try to work with the committees as they're drafting the bill to ensure that it's, more than anything, that it's directed by the best possible science on
Hmm.
PFAS, and we are for um, uh, a regulated PFAS in the future. We just want to make sure that we get there through science and at a reasonable timeline for everybody. So, that's one thing we're really going to be focusing on this year, like we focus on every year. And then, right now we're also looking at waters of the United States. Anybody who's been following the EPA and does any kind of water regulations work know that the only constant is change with waters of the United States, and that seems to be the case again this year. They essentially said they're reverting back to the 2015 rule, and aspects of that are currently under review. And I know the EPA is doing their kind of stakeholder outreach right now. And for us, from the groundwater's perspective, we've always had the position that we wholly endorse groundwater being separate from waters of the United States, and that regulatory bodies mainly be at the state and local level. So that's, of course, waters of the United States is something we're going to be focusing on and spending a lot of time on this year. Some other quick ones, the Water Resource Development Act. That is the piece of legislation that funds the Army Corps of Engineers civilian waterworks, the dams, and the canals and those types of things. We're going to be working more so this year than I think we ever have to ensure that managed aquifer recharge is a part of that bill, and that they're supporting managed aquifer recharge projects, especially out west where this ongoing drought and the usage because of that drought, the overpumping of a lot of their aquifers has put some states in some pretty difficult situations. And then also CDL changes. There were some pretty big changes to commercial driver's license last year, or I'm sorry, couple weeks ago, that we're going to be trying to navigate more for our contractor members. And there's probably, I don't know, 10 or 15 other things I'm just forgetting to mention, but
Mm.
there's no lack of issues that touch the groundwater industry, as everybody knows.
Yeah, well, it's wild that something as simple as CDLs makes such a big impact, right?
Well, it does, and that's the kind of thing that I learned from my members. I see something like that come through my email, and then I don't think much of it. But then my members who have to train new CDL drivers, and it's time out of their day, and it costs them more money, and they're already struggling to keep employees, and those are the kind of opportunities I really have to learn about the industry, and I get to learn about how these different things impact our members in our industry. And it's cool, but it's also you kind of get a sense of what some of these small contracting firms are dealing with.
Oh yeah, and they have limited resources, so being able to get
100%.
some leverage or understanding from someone who has a little more finger on the pulse has got to be
Yeah.
really useful as well.
Yeah.
Um, one of the things, earlier this year, so in January, we did an association forecast, which you had contributed to, and one of the things you mentioned in that was the Maui NPDES permitting case
Yep.
from last fall. Um, and you've been actively working with EPA on some things there. Could you elaborate on the situation there? What's kind of the current status, and what are you guys doing in that front?
So the current status is, so after the Supreme Court case, obviously, the EPA was kind of tasked with creating what a functional equivalent means in a test
Hmm.
for, determining functional equivalency. And in January of 2020, around, I believe, some draft, maybe it was late December, the EPA released some draft guidance, or some initial guidance to do that. And, us, along with, quite a few other water industries, looked at the guidance and just basically felt that from a policy perspective, the guidance really lacked any kind of in the field applicable resource. It didn't really have anything that you could connect point A, point B, means regulation. It just wasn't very usable. As guidance would go on this. So, we, along with other water organizations, really urged the EPA to rescind that guidance and take another shot at it. They did end up rescinding that guidance. The Biden administration ended up rescinding that guidance, and they're currently in the state of creating new guidance, which is where we've been, trying to work with the EPA as much as possible. Obviously, a lot of people are involved in this. But we're going to be coming out with a white paper here in the next 3 or 4 months, we hope, regarding what we think that guidance should entail, and some kind of field-ready suggestions for people in the field who can kind of realize when that regulatory switch is going to be hit. They're going to need to deal with an NPDES permit, or when they're not going to, when it comes to this functional equivalency question. Because right now, I think it's kind of a holding pattern. But the EPA has been very good about being responsive to us. We had a seminar, or I'm sorry, at our summit last year, a groundwater summit. They actually attended a session of ours on functional equivalence and on this case, and were able to take questions from people. So they've been very good about working with us on it, and hopefully this year something will come of it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm glad to hear that there's like such open communication. Not that that hasn't been the case before,
Yeah,
but to see that it continuing at that degree is really, really, really cool to see. And I've heard that from several other folks as well.
yeah,
Um,
and it's you don't always expect it. In fact, a lot of the times you don't expect it when it comes to these big agencies or dealing with it. But they have been nothing but responsive to us, and obviously, they're swamped. They can't
mhm.
respond to everything quickly, but we really get the sense that they're trying,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
is, to some extent, all you can ask for.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but talking about EPA, they've got this new site up about the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and all the different funding elements that are there. I did want to pick your brain on that aspect. What are some of the elements that you guys are looking at NGWA direction wise in terms of funding? How are you communicating that with your members and stuff like that? And what's kind of available for people in the groundwater area?
That's a great question. So, we did a quick overview, no, we shouldn't say quick, around an hour overview of just the groundwater aspects of the bipartisan infrastructure bill earlier this year for our members.
Mm,
And, overall, I would say that we were pretty happy with where this bill came down as far as it comes to groundwater and a lot of water quality issues. Because through most of this is going to go through the state revolving funds, both the clean
mm-hmm,
and the drinking water state revolving funds. And specifically to groundwater, there is money within the bill for managed aquifer recharge projects, to study more managed aquifer recharge projects, as well as better stormwater management. And stormwater management is something that we've been really focusing on the last 2 years, because we see this growing impact of mismanaged stormwater, basically screwing up our groundwater.
mm-hmm.
So, we are very happy with certain elements of the bill concerning managed aquifer recharge, stormwater management, the PFAS funding. We're very happy with, because, I mean, if they do create a new standard in 2023, they spend around $10 billion within this bill for disadvantaged communities, small systems and bigger systems, to help become closer to whatever this compliance is going to be. But that's going to be a drop in the bucket, obviously, to
Mm-hmm.
what these systems are going to need. And it had been the biggest investment in water since the 70s in this country.
Oh yeah.
So so there are just way too many treatment plants that are, behind on regulations, that this money is going to help. This also provides money for people who are on private wells to purchase a point of use and point of entry technology.
Mm.
There's just a lot to like in the bill. And as it has a 5-year lifespan, so obviously we're going to be tracking that spending over the next few years. But what we've been telling everybody is, because most of it is going to be coming through state revolving funds, and a lot of that's going to be grant driven as well, is to keep in contact and keep an eye on what your state's water priorities are and what they're looking to do at the state and local level, because that's where you're going to see most of this money.
Yeah, yeah. Those state revolving funds, like you said, those have been the primary driver for a lot of projects over the past like 2 decades at the very least. And they're clearly being going to become the primary driver moving forward, it seems like too.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be one of those things too, where the states are most of the states are in pretty good financial shape right now, and a lot of that has come from the COVID money and that type of thing. And I'd heard from some states they haven't even spent all their COVID money when they got this. So I think there's could potentially be some issues with how fast the states can get rid of this. You know what I mean? Because they're also
Hmm.
dealing with supply chain issues, labor issues, everything else. So there may be some slowdowns in some specific states to get this money out the door, but I think because we haven't seen an injection of funds like this, the states aren't none. I don't think there's a state out there that doesn't have a laundry list of water projects they want to do.
Oh yeah, 100%.
You
This
know?
money will be spent. There are
Yeah,
projects
yeah,
to use it for.
yeah,
Um, pivoting just a little bit. One of the things that's kind of a little more recent that's being talked about and being discussed for later this year is WOTUS and the Sackett case. Could you explain kind of what's going on here, what this means? You had mentioned it kind of at the top too. What does that
yeah.
mean, and what are the implications potentially for the water industry?
So, and this kind of actually goes into the functional equivalence aspect of this too, because at the heart of the
Okay.
Sackett case, which is this couple bought a piece of land that's not directly adjacent to waters of the United States. And I forget what type of body of water it is. It's a lake or something along those lines. It's basically, or it's wetlands, or I can't remember, but it's not directly adjacent to it. There's no direct connection to it. But essentially, there's the EPA believes there is a chemical. It's having a chemical reaction over there. It's making a chemical impact on those waters of the United States. So the EPA essentially cited these folks in saying that you're in violation. You need to remedy the site. And the Sackett family, or the Sackett organization, basically said, we're not connected to that body of land. We are not, and how the Clean Water Act is written, we're not directly, there's no tributary, there's no stream, there's nothing that's connecting us to this wetlands or whatever this water of the United States over there is. And basically it's all happening underground. So it goes back to this, chemical reaction and this conveyance of things like groundwater and soil to waters of the United States, but that aren't directly connected to them.
Hmm.
So, depending how the court comes down on this, that could very much change waters of the United States, and basically how the Clean Water Act is
Hmm.
uh, I'm sorry, is put out and justified as it
And
comes to the
enforced.
EPA. Yeah, and enforced. That's the word I was looking for.
Yeah.
Yeah, how it's enforced and where it's enforced. I mean, it could be a very drastic change if we're talking about situations like this. And and WOTUS rule is already talking about the notes, the Maui case, and its functional
Hmm.
equivalence. So one thing we did is we urged the EPA to wait until that Sackett case was finished before coming out with WOTUS guidelines, or new WOTUS language, because if that were to go a certain way, that WOTUS language would essentially just be up in the air again and have to get reviewed and redrafted again depending on the outcome of the Sackett case. From what I'm hearing, they're not taking that suggestion and they're going full steam ahead with WOTUS. So it'll be very interesting. The last 2 years, there's been some very interesting cases in federal court regarding water, and water interconnectivity as well as water rights. And
Yeah.
we expect to see more of those as um, water quality issues increase and water supply issues increase.
Oh yeah, particularly out west, and like you
Oh
said,
yeah.
that's such an impact on like the way that Clean Water Act is, like you said, enforced and interpreted,
Yep.
and then the impacts that that potentially could have on NPDES is also there too. So,
Right.
a
And
lot,
I'm
a
not
lot
quite
of
sure.
domino effects
Right.
basically that could happen
And
from that.
and I'm not quite sure if anybody has a good handle on how the court's going to come down on these cases. A
Hmm.
lot of the federal courts just don't want these cases because they're complicated. I mean,
Oh
these
yeah.
these issues aren't made for necessarily judges. They're made for hydrogeologists and that type
Hmm.
of thing. So because of that, there's not necessarily a very ideological build into these things. There's not necessarily a conservative or a liberal point of view on them. So, I think that creates some uncertainty to how SCOTUS is going to rule on this.
Yeah, yeah. Well, last question for you is, are there any state level policy or regulatory items you guys are paying attention to? Obviously, you've got all these national ones that are influenced by some state things, but are there any like particular states that you're looking at things for, or is it all kind of that national level and the implications across the entire country?
Well, we always are in close contact with our state associations because groundwater is still largely managed at the state level and at the regional level.
Yeah.
And because of that, we focus a lot at state policies, and we also depend on our state associations and our members on the ground to keep us informed of what's going on. A few things that we're going to be looking out for, especially out west, is we've seen water well moratoriums become a lot more popular as drought has increased and groundwater depletion and aquifer depletion has somewhat increased. A lot of places like Colorado, California, Nevada, just to name a few, are creating essentially moratoriums with no ends on water wells. And just basically, if you're building a new home, you have to wait to get hooked up to a public system. Or if you do get a water well, you have to plug it once a public system can connect to you. So, we're very sensitive to any kind of rules and regulations that limit the drilling of new water wells, especially in areas that are yet to be connected to public areas, because just you shouldn't be able to hold people hostage until a public utility can get their stuff together to get a line out there.
Yeah.
And this infrastructure money would also come into potential mandatory hookup issues where those are kind of intertwined, where they kick people off their well to connect to public
Hmm.
lines. So we're watching those very closely, and especially in kind of outside of that, but also connected is aquifer recharge projects in states, especially in the reclamation states and in the West, because drought is having a very very bad impact on groundwater right now, because
Hmm.
there's not enough aquifer recharge happening, and we're starting to see that the more you extract groundwater and the more you pump, the excessive pumping from groundwater, you're also seeing increased levels of nitrates in them and
Hmm.
a host of other problems. So I'd say those are a few of the statewide issues that we're always focusing on and will continue to.
Yeah. One thing turns into such a complicated mess of
Yeah.
problems.
It's almost as if everything's connected. Who would have
Yeah,
thought?
it's almost like it's all one water, right?
Yeah, yeah, right, right. There you go.
Well,
Yeah.
Ben, thank you so much for talking today. I really appreciate you taking the time and going over all these items. A lot of them very complex and important for everyone to know and keep tabs on. So
And
appreciate
they
you
should
being able
find
to
somebody
distill it a
better
little
to
bit.
explain them than me.
Well, definitely check out the video description below if you're watching this. We'll get some links from NGWA on some of these things so that you can have some resources to check on as well, so that you have more details that you can look into. But again, Ben, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time.
Hey, thanks a lot. Happy to be here.